Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Christina. I am a carnivore and I'm here sharing carnivore tips and tricks and answering your questions, as well as sharing my journey on carnivore. So one of the questions that I got from yesterday's video was I'd like to know how to get started on carnivore. Now, for me, one of the things that I do recommend before people start carnivore, generally, so if I've got a patient and carnivore is what they are wanting to do to actually support their health, I generally recommend that we start with a gallbladder cleanse. Now, the way that I do that gallbladder cleanse depends on the individual. So if they've got things like kidney stones in the past, if they've got a history of gallstones in the past, or a history of even just pain in that area, or either of those areas, or they have a history of things like arthritis, where they've got some osteoarthritis versus rheumatoid arthritis. So if they've got some osteoarthritis, if they've got some gallbladder stuff, if they've got some gallstone stuff, then that's going to change, and we do it for a little bit longer than if they don't. So if they're a normal average person that has never really had any issues with their gallbladder, not really any issues with kidney stones, not really any issues with things like arthritis, then what I generally recommend is that they start out before they launch, before they start the high fat process, is to start out with 3 days of 6 apples. So those 6 apples a day can be eaten any way you like. So they can be eaten fresh, they can be eaten curried or stewed, they could be eaten sliced and roasted. You could bake the apples, whatever you want. But you've got to aim for those 6 apples a day. Now, ideally, we want those apples to be green apples so that they are higher in pectin. Now, we want that pectin to help soften the stones or soften anything there that could be problematic for you. And so we want those 6 apples in. We want to make sure that you actually eat those 6 apples. So I know for some families, they've I'll make some stewed apples, and they've put all 6 apples in there. Then they've shared that out between 4 people. So that individual did not eat the 6 apples during that period of time. They ate, maybe 2.5. And so we want to make sure that whatever you do, that you throughout that day are eating those 6 apples. Now, if you have any of those other health problems, I always recommend going and seeking help from your own practitioner. I have appointments available. You can work with somebody, but generally speaking, we want to extend that. So we might do that for 6 days. We might do it for 10 days. It just depends on what known scenarios and situations that you actually have. But essentially, that's usually how I start people out, is with 3 days of 6 apples, so that we can soften any stones there. Because one of the comments, that if you go and Google keto, if you go and Google carnivore and you Google gallstones, is that they'll say that keto is known for... So, excuse me there, the dog just ran off. So if you don't know, I have this beautiful little dog here. This is Jasmine. She is sitting next to me while I work because she is my dog and she likes to hang out with me. And she just saw another dog, so she was running off to go and make friends. And then, of course, my husband brought me some lunch, so I had some lunch while I in between the first snip and this snip. So what I was talking about was gallstones, and essentially that there is some, if you go on Google, you'll find some information about keto causing gallstones. That's the analogy that they've made. And the problem is that actually it's not the keto that's caused the gallstones. The only thing that's happened is the keto has mobilized the gallstones. The gallstones were already there. The person had already developed those. Now, we developed them there's a couple of reasons, but the most common reason that most people develop gallstones is that they're actually been under eating fat for significant periods of time. So they've been doing a low fat diet and or low calorie diet. And, when you're doing a low calorie diet, you limit fat, and therefore toxins are being stored within the gallstone, like the gallbladder. So the quick scenario is the liver. One of the ways that the liver actually releases toxicity is to do that with bile. And so with bile salts and bilirubin and the toxins, it packages it all up and it pops it into the gallbladder. Then when we eat fat, the fat triggers the gallbladder to actually contract and squeeze out and empty the contents of that gallbladder. Now, depending on how much fat, depends on how much of that contents comes out of that gallbladder. Now, if that gallbladder has been underused because we've been eating low-fat diets, then the toxins that are being stored there within that bile salts actually start to crystallize over time and start to form into stones. And that's where we are getting the stones from. So the stones are already there in those individuals. And then when they start a high fat diet, what they're doing is now trying to get that gallbladder to mobilize and empty. Now, because it's started to develop stones already, those stones can then become lodged in the opening of the gallbladder. And when they get lodged in the opening of the gallbladder, that's when we're having a gallbladder attack. And that's when we can develop, an infection in our gallbladder where it can get septic and so on and so forth. So that is the reason that I always start these types of protocols with something that's going to soften any types of stones that are in there, which is like that apple and the pectin from those apples. And so, yes, while we're actually planning on taking out all of the vegetables and all of the fruits, what we want to do is utilize some of that plant medicine in the beginning so that we can clear up any of the problems that we may have prior to actually starting the transition or the diet. Now, that's the first thing that I generally recommend for people to do. The next thing that I look at is if there are any other health complications. So, for example, do they have diabetes? Do they have hypothyroidism? Do they have Graves' disease? Do they have Hashimoto's? Do they have adrenal issues? Like, what other health conditions does this person actually have prior to starting a protocol or a dietary change like the carnivore diet? And at that point, I look at any supplementation that individual might specifically need for them. Well, the goal and my personal goal is to help my clients actually get off of any sort of supplements, etc. With maybe some specific things like colloidal minerals, etc., being lifelong ones. To come off of those supplements where possible. Now, if you've lost an organ, so you've had your tonsils removed, or you've had your thyroid removed, or you've had other different parts of your body removed, you will probably never get to that space of being able to come off of all medication and all supplementation. But if you are catching things before they are a problem, then you may be able to get to that space. Now, that's really individual, based on the person and what's happening with their health. But while the goal is to minimize or come off of, artificial supplementation, in the beginning, we may need to use some. Now, that's because you've had a whole life before you've actually started to eat this way. And there's been health complications that have come from the way that you've like the genetics you've received, the way you've eaten before, the lifestyle that you've had. Now, we can't then just jump straight into meat and go, okay, well, meat's going to solve it all, because that's not what's actually going to happen. And you may need some support in the early days, and as your body is starting to rebalance and starting to build up its nutritional stores. So I really recommend that you actually connect or work with a medical professional in that sense, whether it be your alternative practitioners or your doctors. But what I would say is seek somebody who is either keto or carnivore friendly. So not all doctors and not all professionals are. Like, I know, for example, in my field as a naturopath, there is a whole bunch of people that, a whole bunch of practitioners that are 100% not keto and not carnivore friendly. They are, more plant-based and more plant-heavy. And you want to work with somebody that understands it, somebody who's either doing it themselves or has a really good clinical experience with working with people who are doing those types of things, so that you can get really good qualified information. Now, for me, we want to look at anything that needs to be supplemented in that moment in time just to support you through that transition. And I will warn that for majority of people, what will happen is when they start carnivore is for the first two-ish weeks, they will get diarrhea. They'll get the runs. And some people are panicked about it. I've had people who are completely constipated and who have been constipated for decades get the runs and freak out. Oh my God, I'm just everything's coming out of me. And I'm like, yeah, everything's coming out of you. A, your body's doing a lot of detoxification. B, you're increased your fat, so that's going to mobilize everything in your bowels, and your microbiome has to change over. So all of those things happen, and it generally takes a good 2 weeks for that to happen, and then most people find that the diarrhea stops. For a subgroup of people, they will find that they get constipated. Now that's about 10 10 to 20% of people will fall into that constipation phase. And if they are constipated, that's usually when I will use something like oxy powder to actually help give a good flush and clear those bowels and get rid of any of the old debris that's been hanging out in the sides of the bowels and sticking around causing problems. If they have ongoing constipation, then that's an indication for me that they actually need to up their fats. And we might need to be adding a little bit of extra things like some magnesium to their diet as well. And my favorite way to get magnesium in is with heart organ meat is really good with magnesium and really high with magnesium. So that's my favorite way to do it from a meat perspective. But we may need to use some supplemental magnesium for a period of time. Now, I've talked about this in a previous video where I talked about fiber and the fiber myth, but I'm not sure if I've shared that on YouTube. I'll check. But when it comes to fiber, there is this theory that you can't poop without fiber, and I can tell you 100% you definitely can. And if you are requiring fiber to actually poop, then what's actually happening for you is you've got a bowel that's lazy. So it's meant to do these beautiful peristaltic motions where it's squeezing, and as it squeezes, the villi and the microvilli actually come in contact with the chymin or the poo or the food, depending on where it is in the digestive system, comes in contact with that. And as it comes in contact with it, there are enzymes that are passed between the villi and the microvilli, and there are nutrients that are taken in via the villi and the microvilli. And if that's not happening, then you're actually not getting if you're not doing this motion, if you're only half doing this motion, then you're not actually getting all of the nutrition from your actual food, and your food is being pushed through the pipeline versus your muscles being active and actually doing the work. And so that is something to think about as well. And when we are rebuilding muscles that have not been used or have atrophied because they haven't been used for some time, then what's going to happen is that you have to give them time to build up, and you have to give them nutrients in order to do that. And good quality protein as well as good magnesium is actually going to help them do that as well. So that's something to be mindful of if you're starting out on carnivore. Now, the other thing that I generally recommend for people who are starting out on carnivore is make the first week fun. Make it where you are really looking forward to eating. So for example, meat can be expensive, and the first week you can feel a bit lousy because you're going through detoxification. So you can get headachy, you can get lethargic and tired, and you might not feel great. You might be moody, you might have a bit of aggression that's coming up, and that's as your liver is starting to move, anger is coming out of that liver. Now, that might be pretty normal for you to experience. And so it can be really easy, especially if you're getting sugar cravings, to like go, oh gosh, this sucks. I'm going to go eat the Mars bar or whatever else it is that you want to eat. So make that first week of food fun. Ignore how much it's costing. Buy the best food. So if you have a particular type of steak that you really like. So for me, my favorite steak is a Scotch sirloin. That is my favorite steak. So buy that. Salmon, I love salmon, and make sure that you don't just get the tiny little bit, get enough that you're actually going to feel full and satisfied. So get 2 pieces. Get your favorite meats. Like if you're a really, really slow roasted lamb, get lamb and slow roast it. Make it so that in that first week you are eating food that you absolutely love and you can't wait for the meal. So you're like, oh, I can't wait to eat this meal, like it's Christmas week, right? And make it so that first week, while you could be feeling a little bit lousy, could be feeling not so fabulous, that you're actually really looking forward to the food, because it's by eating the food that you actually get out of that detoxification phase a little bit quicker. Because if you give your body lots of fat and you're giving it lots of nutrients, then it's able to detoxify a little bit faster than if it's running on, slow-mo. The next thing that I would say is look at budget after that. The weeks after that, look at, how do I do this more cheaply, etc., etc. Look at the cheaper cuts of meat and those types of things. but really enjoy that first week of eating so that it's easier to get through the sugar cravings. It's easier to get through that first week of making a big transition and change. Now, if you are craving sugar and you enjoy prawns is a really good way to actually just give yourself a little bit of a sweet flavor without getting that sugar hit. Now, they do have a couple of carbohydrates in it, so it will, boost your carbohydrates a little bit, but it won't do it to the point that you're kicking yourself out of ketosis or stopping yourself from getting into ketosis or any of those sorts of things, because they are pretty low. But it is often enough to just help to take away some of those sugar cravings. The other thing is to eat little blocks of butter. There is recipes for browned butter everywhere on the internet. I haven't necessarily done that because it's a little bit hard to do in my living situation at this point in time. But you can certainly make browned butter, little bites and those types of things to help you through that first week. If you're having a big sugar craving, you're better off having a little bit of yogurt. Pick natural yogurt. So 100 grams of natural yogurt has about 12-ish carbohydrates in it. To get into ketosis, you need to stay under 20 carbohydrates. And so sometimes even just a couple of mouthfuls of that yogurt is enough to just take away that sugar craving and satisfy you and keep you going. You might even want to put that yogurt into little ice blocks and have like little frozen yogurt bites to help you through that early week and that early transition. So starting out on carnivore, those are some of my top tips. First, I usually do that gallbladder cleanse. Pick foods that you really love so that you're enjoying that first week of eating. Then also, if you need something sweet, have a little bit of yogurt, have a little bit of, prawns. Those are a really good source to actually just give you a little bit of that sweet without actually having a lot of sweet. And you can even do some things like adding a little bit of vanilla essence to some sour cream or cream and, eating that, and that can feel like it's something sweet without adding any sugar to it or even a sugar alternative. I would also say in that first week, start with writing down everything. Before you start, take your measurements, weigh yourself, measure yourself, arms, breasts, stomach, thighs, hips, etc. Measure all of those things so that you can track them. If you have a blood glucose monitor, measure that. If you have ketones, measure that. If you have a pulseometer, an oxygenation, measure that. Measure as many different things as you can measure. If you've got blood pressure machine, measure that. Watch all of those things just to see how your body is going, and know that first week is going to be more stressful for you because your body is doing a big job, especially those first 2 weeks where you might have some diarrhea. Your body's working really hard. And you want to be careful and kind and loving to it while it's doing that hard work. The other thing that I would say to have is some electrolytes. Now, I personally use the Ancient Lake electrolytes. Adding some of that to water, especially when you've got diarrhea, can be really helpful to replenish what you might be losing during that phase. Other nutrients that I tend to look at is iodine. I always like Lugol's iodine and the external painting of it, because you are much less likely to overdose on iodine if you're doing it externally than if you were doing it internally, and there is always that risk. Again, work with a medical professional who can actually talk to you about those things and see what you actually need. Address any sort of deficiencies or get some supplemental support if you need it because you have ongoing health conditions. The goal is, again, for me, is to take out those things over time. But, we have a population that is much sicker than it used to be. The people that I work with now are much sicker than they used to be when I first started working 10 years ago. And so the challenges that they face and the things that we have to do are a little bit different than what we might have had to do 10 years ago, because we had more buffer space, we had more room because they weren't as sick. So there is certainly some changes there. I think that's about it. There's certainly some more that generally come to mind. Epsom salts, that's it. Have some detox baths. If you've got an ocean nearby, go swim in the ocean. If you don't, have a bath with some Epsom salts in it. If you don't have a bath, have a foot bath with Epsom salts in it. Go outside among trees. breathing them in. Put your feet on the soil, like put your bare feet on the soil, get some earthing happening so that you're, allowing your body to release negative ions, all of that type of stuff. Look at all of the other ways that you can support yourself when it comes to detoxification. All right, I think those are my top tips for starting carnivore. If you have any other questions, put them below. If you have any tips below as well, if you have any tips, pop them below in the chat box as well. I would love to talk to you about them as well. So that's it for now. Bye for now. See you later. So I will just add one more thing, and that is if you are looking to work with a practitioner, I am certainly available. I do have a carnivore support group, which has, a whole group of people that are doing carnivore. We talk on Voxer pretty much every day. And, we have a monthly meetup where we jump on Zoom and we chat about what's happening in our lives in regards to carnivore, our wins, our non-scale victories, our challenges, all of that type of stuff. And there's lots to be gained by being a part of those conversations. So if you would like that, you're more than welcome to send me a message and I can help you find that. But you can find my carnivore group on christinamatthewson.com/carnivore support. Otherwise, send me a message. I'm happy to help you. All right, bye for now. Have the most amazing day ever, and I will talk to you soon.